On a flight from Los Angeles to London, a 16-year-old black girl named Layla Thompson stepped into the first-class cabin with excitement sparkling in her eyes. She had no idea that the ticket in her hand, the very first-class ticket of her life, was about to become the symbol of one of the most painful lessons about prejudice, power, and human dignity. Everything started out perfectly normal until Captain Richard Hale, a gray-haired man in his 50s, walked down the aisle and stopped right in front of her seat. His gaze lingered on her young face, then on her skin color. A frown formed. His voice turned cold. "Are you sure you're not in the wrong seat?" Seconds later, the ticket was torn in half, and in that instant it wasn't just the ticket that got ripped apart, but also a child's faith in fairness and humanity. But what no one, not even Captain Hale, could have known was that Layla's father, the man flying on a private jet just a few hundred miles away, was none other than Marcus Thompson, the CEO of the airline that owned the very plane Captain Hale was commanding. The story isn't just about an act of humiliation. It's a symphony of silent justice, a reminder that true power never needs to shout. Morning in Pasadena, California. The sky was so clear that the oak trees cast their own reflections on the pavement. Inside a small white house at the corner of Cedar Street, Layla Thompson stood before the mirror, straightening the tie on her school uniform. Her dark hair was neatly braided. Her bright eyes held both the sky and a touch of nervousness. She was about to fly to London, not for a vacation, but to represent the state of California at the International Youth Debate Championship, the world's most prestigious debate contest for high school students. For Layla, this wasn't just a competition. It was her way of proving that her voice, no matter where it came from or what color it wore, deserved to be heard. In the kitchen, the smell of coffee drifted softly through the air. Marcus Thompson, her father, sat quietly reading the morning paper. Deep-set eyes, calm voice, the kind of man who never needed to raise it to be listened to. On the front page, the Arius Air logo appeared beside an article on the latest aviation technology. Marcus glanced at it and smiled faintly. "Make sure you eat breakfast before heading to the airport." "Layla," he said, eyes still on the page. "Yes, Dad," she replied. It all sounded perfectly ordinary except for the fact that Layla didn't know her father was the founder of Arius Air, one of the fastest-growing private airlines in the United States. Marcus and his wife Olivia had agreed to keep it secret. They wanted Layla to grow up as a normal girl to see the world from the ground, not from the top. They never spoke of wealth or power. They only taught her one thing. Dignity doesn't need to be proven. It only needs to be preserved. Layla grew up believing that. She was bright, soft-spoken, always polite, so much that her friends sometimes teased her as an old soul trapped in a 16-year-old's body. While Olivia packed the suitcase, she whispered to Marcus like a passing breeze, "Are you sure about this first class? VIP lounge people will notice her." Marcus smiled. "It's fine. It's a gift. She deserves to experience something good at least once before the world starts testing her for real." LAX International Airport, 9 a.m. Lines stretched long across the check-in area. Yellow lights reflecting on the polished floor like molten metal. Layla, pulling her blue suitcase, stepped toward the first-class counter separated from the rest by glass walls and soft red carpet. She hesitated, almost afraid she might be in the wrong place. "Excuse me, is this the first-class counter?" she asked softly. The agent smiled, looked at her passport, and typed something into the screen. Then a tiny line of text popped up that made her pause. Ensure passenger receives ultimate first-class experience. Code MT Prime Joe 001. The woman looked up, her tone instantly warmer. Congratulations, Miss Layla Thompson. Your ticket has the highest priority code. Please follow me to the first-class lounge. Layla frowned slightly. MT Prime 001. It sounded like some kind of secret code. She didn't understand, but didn't ask. The Aureus First Lounge was quiet, like a five-star hotel. Leather chairs, crystal glasses, soft jazz humming through the air. Layla chose a corner seat, gazing through the glass wall where planes lined up like giant birds ready to leave their nest. In her hand, the boarding pass read Seat 2A, First Class. It felt like a door had just opened from an ordinary 16-year-old public school student to a state representative, to now sitting in first class on her way to London. She had no idea the world was about to test whether she could truly hold on to what her father had taught her. Dignity doesn't need to be proven. When the boarding call echoed through the lounge, she stood, smoothing her jacket. A flight attendant smiled and bowed slightly, checking her ticket. Layla smiled back, polite as ever. Inside the cabin, golden light and spread across the rows of leather seats. The scent of perfume and coffee mingled in the air, luxury with a hint of distance. Seat 2A right by the window, closest to the cockpit. She placed her small bag in the overhead bin and sat down, inhaling deeply. It felt weightless, like she had just crossed into another world. I remember that feeling. The voice inside whispered, soft and distant, the first time you sit somewhere others spend a lifetime working toward. You're not arrogant, just scared. Scared someone might say, "You're in the wrong seat." Layla looked around. Most passengers were middle-aged, neatly dressed, speaking softly. A few glanced her way, not unkindly, but enough for her to feel the quiet difference. A young black girl, seated among the world's accomplished. That difference, unspoken yet heavy, hummed beneath the red carpet like a hidden current. She opened her notebook and wrote on the first page, "Flight to London. I'll do my best, for Mom and Dad, and for everyone who was ever told they weren't good enough." Across the ocean, Marcus Thompson sat in a boardroom at Aureus Air headquarters in Dallas. A closed meeting with the board of directors, discussions about new routes, European expansion, and Flight Aureus 209 taking off from Los Angeles at that very moment. No one in the room knew the CEO's own daughter was sitting in seat 2A. On the table, Marcus's phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. "She's on board. Everything's fine." He replied simply, "Good. Let her see the world." Setting the phone down, he turned back to the presentation. No one noticed the way his eyes paused when the slide showed a cockpit photo, two seasoned pilots preparing for takeoff. One of them, Captain Richard Hale, was a man Marcus himself had signed years ago. Skilled, disciplined, but still clinging to some old beliefs Marcus had long tried to change. As the Airbus A380 lifted off the runway, Layla gripped the armrest. The engines roared, and the world outside shrank into the window's frame. She smiled. Her dream was taking flight with her. What she didn't know was that, just a few hours later, this very cabin first class, seat 2A, would become the epicenter of a quiet collision between prejudice and justice. And she, a 16-year-old girl, would unknowingly make an entire corporation look into the mirror of its own soul. I remember, the echo of her future voice would say, how peaceful it felt at first. No one yelled, no one insulted me. The sky was blue, and I thought if justice exists, it must look like that sky silent, but infinite. That afternoon, Los Angeles International Airport shimmered under metallic sunlight. Inside the terminal, footsteps echoed across the marble floor, blending with the rhythmic roll of suitcase wheels and the steady hum of boarding announcements. Layla Thompson stopped in front of the Arias first-class check-in counter, a golden sign embossed with the company's winged laurel logo gleaming like a crest of prestige. The economy section nearby buzzed with chatter and motion, while this area felt like another world, quiet, slow, and weighted with invisible privilege. She placed her passport and ticket on the counter. The check-in agent, a warm-faced woman in her 50s with chestnut hair, smiled politely and began typing. Then the woman's hands froze. A single, bolded line glowed on her screen, more prominent than anything else. Ensure passenger receives ultimate first-class experience. Code MT Prime Ordo 01. The agent looked up, lowering her voice as if addressing someone far more important than she had expected. "Are you Miss Layla Thompson?" Layla nodded, a bit confused. "Yes, that's me. Please, wait just a moment." The woman pressed a button to call a supervisor. A man in a black suit arrived, his name badge reading Supervisor. The two exchanged a few quiet words and a meaningful glance. Then the supervisor turned to Layla with a polished smile. "Miss Thompson, it's an honor to have you with us today. Please follow me to the Aureus First Lounge." Layla blinked in surprise. "Oh, I'm just a regular passenger. Really, there's nothing special about me. Your ticket carries the company's highest priority code," he replied smoothly. "Very few passengers ever receive that." She nodded, a shy smile tugging at her lips, curiosity flickering behind her eyes. The first-class lounge was completely separate from the rest of the airport. The sliding doors opened to reveal a different reality, golden light, the faint scent of sandalwood, and soft jazz floating through a hush of air-conditioned stillness. Leather chairs, mahogany tables, a bar serving fine wines, espresso, and fresh juices. A staff member in white gloves greeted her with a gentle smile. "Welcome, Miss Thompson. We've prepared a private seat for you." She followed him to a quiet corner by the window, where the runway stretched endlessly into the afternoon glow. Giant Airbus A380s lined up outside, their silver bodies reflecting sunlight like liquid steel. Layla sat down, fingertips brushing the cool surface of the glass of orange juice set before her. The sensation was surreal, as if she were stepping into a version of the world she'd only seen on TV. "I remember that moment," the echo of her voice murmured, and this strange question whispered inside my head. "Will people look at me differently just because I'm sitting here?" It had no answer, only the quiet unease of something I'd learned to hide since childhood. Across the lounge, a news broadcast played softly. The International Youth Debate Championship was being featured. Flags, bright faces, and confident smiles from the students around the world. Layla spotted her name in the scrolling list, Layla Thompson, California, United States. A lounge attendant approached. "Would you like some dessert or tea?" "Miss Thompson mint tea, please. Thank you." She sipped the tea, gazing out at the Aureus jet gleaming on the tarmac, its golden bird emblem stretching its wings as if ready to soar. That aircraft carried her dreams, and the quiet pride of a father watching from miles away. In Dallas, Marcus Thompson sat in the Aureus airboard room, eyes fixed on the company's internal flight tracker displayed on a massive screen. Flight Aureus 209, Los Angeles to London, status Borden in progress. At the bottom was the note he'd personally added that morning. MT Prime 001, full courtesy, no exceptions. Marcus looked at the code, then calmly signed another stack of documents. He didn't call Layla, didn't send her a message. He knew she didn't need favors, only fairness. But deep inside, a quiet pride flickered, the pride of a father who knew his daughter was about to stand on her own in a world that didn't always play fair. Boarding time. Layla followed the first-class priority lane. Passengers glanced at her, a young brown-skinned girl with a simple backpack and an almost timid air. From somewhere behind, she caught a whisper. Is that girl really in the first-class line? The words weren't cruel, but they hung in the air like an old scar that never fully healed. Layla didn't turn. She simply pressed her lips together and kept walking. We learned early how to walk through those looks. Her inner voice said, no arguments, no explanations, just keep moving. Because if you stop, they'll say you're being too sensitive. Inside the first-class cabin, everything was bathed in soft, golden light. Cream-colored leather seats wide enough to stretch out on, large windows with whisper-smooth shades. A young flight attendant bowed slightly. Welcome aboard, Miss Thompson. Your seat is 2A, right by the window. If you need anything, just press the button by your armrest. Layla thanked her in a voice barely above a whisper. She sat down, placed her notebook on the table, and looked around. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man flipped through an economics magazine. Farther down, a woman in a navy blue suit spoke briskly into her phone. Everyone around her seemed used to this world, but Layla, she was here for the first time. A steward brought her a glass of apple juice. Layla nodded politely and took a sip. The faint scent of new leather, metal, and filtered air filled her lungs. Outside, the skies over Los Angeles blurred behind the glass. The engines began to hum low, steady, like the heartbeat of a steel giant. In the cockpit, Captain Richard Hale scanned the passenger manifest for first class. His eyes paused on one line, Layla Thompson, age 16, seat 2A. He frowned slightly. So young, he murmured, probably some rich kid. His co-pilot replied, her ticket has the MT Prime 001 code. That's top-tier priority. Hale nodded silently. He'd been flying for over 30 years, long enough to have seen every kind of passenger, every kind of attitude. But something about that name Thompson made him pause. Thompson, he muttered. It rang familiar, though he couldn't place where he'd heard it before. He folded the manifest and began the pre-flight checks. Just another routine flight. At least, for now. Layla leaned back in her seat. The plane began to taxi. On the screen before her, a green line traced the path across the ocean connecting two worlds, dreams and reality. I don't know if sitting high above the clouds lets people truly see what's beneath. Her inner voice whispered, but I do know there are things you can only see when you stay calm. She smiled faintly. She didn't know that within just a few hours, this elegant first-class cabin would turn into the stage for a quiet confrontation, one that would test not only her composure, but the very soul of a system built on power and perception. The Airbus A380 taxied away from the gate, afternoon light slanting across the first-class cabin and glinting on the polished wooden tables. The low, steady hum of the engines pulsed like the heartbeat of a giant creature waiting to take off. Layla Thompson sat in seat 2A, by the window. In front of her, a napkin folded like a bird's wing, a glass of water clear as crystal, and the paper ticket she was still holding. Everything was so quiet she could hear her own breathing. A young flight attendant bent down. "Do you need anything else?" "Ma'am," Layla smiled and shook her head. She just wanted to savor this moment, the moment when dreams that once felt far away suddenly felt close. Then the cabin door opened. A man in a captain's uniform stepped in. Gray hair, square shoulders, black shoes polished to a mirror shine. He walked slowly, eyes sweeping the cabin in the habit of a man used to controlling every space he entered. Captain Richard Hale. 35 years of flying. Famous for being strict, methodical, and cold. In the company. People said he had never been wrong, which was exactly why he didn't always know when he actually was. He stopped in the aisle, just a few steps from seat 2A. His eyes landed on Layla, a brief pause, as if what he was seeing didn't match what he expected from a first-class passenger. Layla looked up and gave him a polite nod. "Good afternoon, Captain." Hale looked at the ticket in her hand, then back at her young face and her warm brown skin. His voice cut through the cabin, cold and clear enough for everyone to hear. "Are you in the wrong seat? This is the first-class cabin." The air tightened. A few passengers looked up. A man in seat 3B gave a small laugh, hiding it behind his newspaper. An older woman glanced Layla up and down, then turned away. Layla sat still. She didn't understand, or rather, she understood all too well. I know that tone. The tone that carries a familiar kind of doubt, like the time someone at the school library asked me, "Are you sure you're supposed to be in this class?" She calmly held up her ticket, her voice soft but clear. "No, sir. This is my seat, 2A." Hale didn't take it right away. He narrowed his eyes and reached out, as if it needed to be verified. Layla handed him the ticket. He took it and looked at the name Layla Thompson. 1 second, 2 seconds, then, slowly, almost deliberately, he tore the ticket in half. The sound of paper ripping was sharp, metallic in the silence. "People like you don't sit here," he said, voice rough and sure. "Go to the back." No one breathed too loud. No one said a word. Even the engine noise outside seemed to fade. Layla looked at the torn ticket in his hand, then at him. No outburst, no tears, no argument, only her eyes still and deep like water you can't see the bottom of. "If I say something, they'll use my words against me. If I smile, they'll say I'm arrogant. If I cry, they'll say I'm weak." So I chose silence. A man, a few rows back, whispered, "She probably took the wrong seat." Another replied, "Nowadays anyone can print a fake ticket." The whispers fell through the cabin like dust. Layla lowered her head, picked up the torn pieces, folded them neatly, and placed them on the table. Her hands didn't shake, which somehow made everyone even more uncomfortable. At the back of the cabin, Clara Nguyen, the lead flight attendant, walked quickly toward them. She'd heard everything, but kept her voice steady. "Captain Hale." "Is there a problem?" Hale turned. "This passenger is in the wrong seat. I'll take care of it." Clara looked at Layla, her gaze warm, precise. "Sir, let me just double-check." She opened her handheld tablet, entered the seat number and passenger name. The screen turned gold, the highest priority tier. A code appeared that made Clara freeze for a second. MT Prime, now 1. She looked up, lowered her voice. "Captain, this code was issued by Executive Chairman Marcus Thompson. She's a VIP passenger. She's not in the wrong seat." Hale frowned. "You sure?" "Yes, absolutely." This code is never given to regular passengers. Silence stretched between them. Hale glanced around. A few passengers were watching. Others were pretending not to. He nodded, voice a bit lower, but still hard. Fine. Take her to the auxiliary seating area. I'll verify after takeoff. Clara knew she couldn't argue with him right then. She turned to Layla and said gently, "Miss Thompson, would you come with me for a moment? Please, I'll get this sorted out right away." Layla stood. She gave a small, polite bow, said nothing. Dozens of eyes followed her. When you're the different one in the room, every gaze becomes a weight. But I remember my dad saying, "You don't have to win with your voice. Just let them see you don't bow." In the cockpit, a few minutes later, Clara reported through the internal system, "Captain Hale. MT Prime Wu1 is confirmed. Passenger Layla Thompson is a special guest. Directive from headquarters." Hale paused. That sentence landed on him like a stone. Marcus Thompson. The name rang in his head. The name he'd heard in shareholder meetings. The man who'd founded the very airline he was flying for. After a moment, he let out a small, controlled scoff and tried to keep his tone neutral. "All right, I'll handle it on landing," but Clara knew nothing about this was normal anymore. Layla sat in the auxiliary seating area, looking down the long corridor, in her hand, the torn ticket now patched with the small strip of tape Clara had given her. On the paper, the words Aureus Air, Seat 2A, Layla Thompson were still visible, even though the line was broken. She ran a finger over it, not just over the paper, but over something deeper than the insult itself, over that invisible line between those who belonged and those who were told to leave. They say justice comes from courts and laws, but I think it starts the moment someone chooses not to strike back. Somewhere high above the earth, the Airbus kept climbing. In the cockpit, Captain Hale sat upright, eyes forward, but his hand gripped the yoke tighter than usual. He didn't know that in just a few minutes, a satellite call would come through carrying the deep, cold, authoritative voice of the man he had just indirectly insulted, Marcus Thompson. And from that moment on, the power would start to shift. The air in the first-class cabin felt frozen in place. The golden ceiling lights reflected off every face silent, half curious, half uneasy. Layla Thompson sat in seat 2A, both hands resting on her knees, forcing herself to stay calm. She had just been told to leave her seat. Captain Richard Hale stood before her, uniform crisp, his voice cutting through the stillness once meant for the gentle clink of champagne glasses. "Didn't you hear me?" he said sharply. "Go to the back." No one responded. The silence stretched so long it felt like people could hear the ticking of their own hearts. Layla lifted her head. Her eyes met his, a stare no longer questioning, but heavy with the certainty of someone used to commanding others. She held out her ticket. Her voice was soft, but each word carried a steady weight. "This is my seat, sir. 2A. Hale glanced down. The name Layla Thompson printed clearly across the ticket. He read it aloud, emphasizing the last name, as if testing whether she knew what kind of name she was carrying. "Layla Thompson," he repeated. Then, slowly, deliberately, he tore the ticket in half right in front of her. The sound was dry and crisp, and in that hushed cabin, it cracked through the air like a gunshot. A man in the back gave a short whistle, unclear if in shock or approval. A woman with a pearl necklace covered her mouth and turned toward the window. No one said anything. No one stood up. I remember that kind of silence, the kind that doesn't come from fear, but from complicity. It's when you realize the scariest thing isn't the one who humiliates you, it's everyone who watches it happen and stays quiet. Layla looked at the torn paper on the table, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't cry, only her eyes blurred. Hale leaned closer, his voice lowered but loud enough for everyone to hear. People like you don't belong here. First class is for passengers who meet the standard, not for someone who wandered in by mistake. Each word dropped like a shard of ice. Layla heard them, understood them, and still, she stayed silent. She inhaled deeply. The air felt metallic, the cold taste of swallowed humiliation. Clara Nguyen, the chief flight attendant, approached, her face calm but her eyes sharp as glass. "Captain," she said quietly, "this passenger has the highest priority code MT Prime 041. I've verified it." Hale didn't look at her. He kept his gaze fixed on Layla, as though he hadn't heard a word. "She can explain later. For now, I'm asking her to leave this seat." Layla stood. No protest, no questions. She simply picked up her small backpack, bowed slightly, and stepped into the aisle. A man muttered, "At least the girl knows her place." The woman beside him chuckled a short, cold laugh, thin as a blade. If they knew who I was, would their tone change? But if respect only comes once you reveal your name, what's the worth of that respect at all? Clara followed her, gently placing a hand on Layla's shoulder at the back of the cabin. "Please, have a seat here for now. I'll take care of this," she said softly. Layla nodded. Her voice came out rough. "It's all right. I'm fine." The words sounded ordinary. But when she spoke them, they stretched like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Clara turned back toward the front cabin. Her smile, the trained one of service, was gone. She entered the cockpit and picked up the intercom. "Captain Hale." Her voice was firm now, stripped of all pretense. "I just confirmed with operations. The MT Prime ZAZO-ZOA-1 code was issued directly by Chairman Marcus Thompson." There was no response for several seconds. Then Hale's voice came through, clipped and harsh. "Understood, Clara. You can return to your post." She shut off the channel, but she knew this wasn't over. In the auxiliary seating area, Layla looked out the window. Below, the clouds stretched in endless white. She no longer felt like she was flying, only like she was suspended in the weightless void of humiliation. "I used to think if I worked hard enough, people would respect me. But some people don't see intelligence, they only see skin." A single tear slipped down. Quiet, no sobbing, just one. Then silence again, in the cockpit. Hale removed his cap and leaned back. His co-pilot, Ethan Brooks, hesitated, then said softly, "Don't you think that was too much?" Hale frowned. "You're young. Ethan, you don't understand. Discipline and order matter. I don't let anyone sit in that seat unless I'm sure they belong there." Ethan looked straight ahead. "But you tore up a 16-year-old's ticket," he said quietly, "and it looked like the only thing you doubted was the color of her skin." Hale didn't reply. It was the silence of a man who didn't know how or didn't want to face himself. He straightened in his seat, focusing on the instruments as if mechanical precision could quiet the noise inside. Back in the cabin, Clara returned to Layla. She gently draped a thin blanket over her shoulders. "Would you like me to call someone for you?" Layla shook her head. "No, thank you." She unlocked her phone and looked at her wallpaper, a photo of her her father, and her mother at the California State Debate Awards. Her father, Marcus, had his arm around her shoulders, smiling with pride. Below the photo was a line he'd once written to her: "Be still, and let the truth make its way." She whispered it softly, like a prayer. Dad once said justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. Now, I'm starting to understand what that means. At the Aureus Air Operations Center in Dallas, an alert flashed across the internal system sent directly by Clara Nien. Code MT Prime UVO001. Service disruption reported. The operations manager opened the passenger file and froze at the name Layla Thompson, daughter of CEO Marcus Thompson. It took only minutes for the signal to reach a private jet flying high above the clouds where Marcus Thompson was in a meeting with international partners. His assistant approached quietly, handing him an iPad. "Sir, you'll want to see this." On the screen was an internal camera feed showing Layla sitting alone, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes lowered. Marcus said nothing. He set down his coffee, his gaze drifting from the screen to the endless blue horizon outside the window. Justice, sometimes, doesn't need to fly to arrive. It only needs a signal. And aboard that Airbus A380, where a young girl had just been humiliated for the color of her skin, the wind of truth was beginning to shift direction. The Airbus A380 kept slicing through the clouds, smooth as a manufactured sleep. But inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere had already changed color. No more soft laughter, no more elegant wine scent. Only a heavy silence, the kind that settles over people who have just watched something wrong happen and don't yet know what to do with it. Layla Thompson sat in the auxiliary seating area, white cabin light fallen on her young face, making her eyes look even deeper. In her hands was the ticket that had been torn in half, now clumsily taped back together with a strip of clear tape that Clara had found in the medical kit. Clara Nguyen, the purser, stood a few steps away. She looked at Layla not with pity, but with something else: recognition. A clear, cold understanding that what had just happened could not be excused as a misunderstanding. There are moments when you're no longer just airline staff, you're just a human being, standing between right and wrong. Clara unlocked her handheld tablet and signed into the airline's internal system. She entered the passenger's booking code, Layla Thompson. The screen lit up with full details. Passenger name: route Los Angeles, London, seat 2A, first class. Special note: MT Prime Bows L1. She paused, brow folding just a little. MT Prime 0001 was Aureus Air's highest priority code, reserved only for a very select group heads of state, founding shareholders, and family of the airline's top leadership. Clara scrolled further down to the additional notes. A line appeared small, but sharp as steel, authorized by Marcus Thompson, CEO. She exhaled slowly. Her pulse changed rhythm. Thompson. That name rang in her mind like memory. She had heard it 1,000 times in meetings, in internal newsletters, in the success stories about the first black-owned, black-led aviation group to break into the U.S. luxury air market. Clara looked up. Sitting right in front of her was Marcus Thompson's daughter, a 16-year-old girl who had just been publicly humiliated by the captain on the very aircraft carrying her father's logo. Clara closed the tablet, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Layla, can you tell me your father is Marcus Thompson?" "Right." Layla was quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. There was no smugness in it. No, do you know who I am attitude. Just a small, reluctant nod like someone admitting something she'd rather keep hidden. I didn't say anything because I don't want people to think I have special treatment, she said softly. All I wanted was to be treated like everyone else. Clara stood still. In that moment, she didn't just see a kid who'd been insulted. She saw the system she worked for, a system that looked fair, but still allowed something like this to happen in the sky, in a space where everyone thought they were above all that. Clara turned and walked toward the cockpit. Every step on the carpet felt heavier. She stopped at the cockpit door and knocked twice. First Officer Ethan Brooks cracked it open. Eyes puzzled. "What is it, Clara?" She handed him the tablet. "Look at this." Ethan read. His eyes widened. "Oh my God, that girl is—" "Yes," Clara cut in, her voice even, "Marcus Thompson's daughter. And we just let the captain tear her ticket in front of everyone." Ethan looked at her, and between them was a cold, metallic understanding. This wasn't a passenger mix-up. This was a moral breach. Captain Hale turned around, annoyed. "What's going on?" Clara kept her composure. "Captain, the passenger you asked to vacate seat 2A, that was Layla Thompson. She has code MT Prime 001 issued directly by the CEO. Hale scoffed, half disbelieving. "You're sure a kid like that?" "Absolutely, sir," Clara replied. "She's Mr. Marcus Thompson's daughter." Silence. The air in the cockpit thickened, buzzing with the hum of the avionics. Ethan looked at the captain, waiting. Hale pressed his lips together. "So, you're telling me I just humiliated the daughter of the highest-ranking person in this company." "Not just highest ranking," Clara said, eyes steady. "The man who founded the airline you're flying right now." Ethan took a breath, shaking his head slightly. "Jesus." Clara said nothing more. She opened the internal comms and switched to the satellite service line reserved for VIP service incidents, Arrayus Executive Relay. The operator's voice came through. "This is Arrayus Air Operations." "Hello, Clara. This is Clara Nguyen, purser on Flight 209, route LAX to London," she said slowly, each word like a line on a report. "I need to file an urgent incident regarding a passenger with code MT Prime 001. On the other end, the operator's tone changed immediately. "Please confirm MT Prime 001 confirmed. Passenger name Layla Thompson. She was just subjected to serious disrespectful treatment by Captain Richard Hale. I request this report be escalated to the highest executive level. Please hold," the operator said, voice dropping. 1 minute passed, 2. Then the system chimed back in. "Your report has been relayed directly to the CEO's aircraft. Marcus Thompson is in flight and will receive it immediately." Clara let out a slow breath and ended the call. She knew from this moment on. Flight 209 was no longer just a commercial route. It had just become a courtroom in the sky. In the auxiliary cabin, Layla still sat quietly. She didn't know what was happening in the cockpit, but she could feel the shift. The flight attendants' footsteps grew more purposeful, their eyes more alert. "I wasn't afraid. I just found it strange. Sometimes justice doesn't need you to act. It just needs someone else to have seen it." She looked out the window at the white ocean of clouds. The light bounced off her eyes not with triumph, but with the calm of someone who understood she didn't have to shout to be heard. In the cockpit, Hale sat upright, both hands on the controls. Ethan glanced at him. "What are you going to do?" Hale didn't answer. On the panel, a light began to blink, incoming satellite call. Ethan swallowed. That's the top-tier executive line. Hale stared at the screen. The caller ID appeared, Marcus Thompson. He blinked. His hand trembled slightly. His lips moved, but no words came. Outside, the Airbus A380 kept gliding through the sky. No one in first class knew that justice was boarding their flight not through anger, not through shouting, but through a silent signal and a father who didn't need to raise his voice to reclaim his daughter's dignity. Dad always said, truth has its own way of getting where it needs to go. Now I see it doesn't need wings. It just needs someone to say, that's enough. High above 40,000 feet, the Gulfstream G700 sliced through the night sky a silent streak of silver. Inside, the cabin glowed in soft amber light. A walnut desk, a digital flight map speckled with tiny dots, hundreds of flights tracing their invisible paths across the dark heavens. Marcus Thompson sat mid-cabin, a tailored gray suit draped neatly over his shoulders, a cup of untouched coffee cooling by his hand. His eyes rested on the oval window, where the endless sky stretched open still, infinite. He was en route from New York to Zurich, a short business trip, not important enough to bring his full advisory team. On the desk, a mechanical watch ticked softly, the only sound in the cabin. Then the satellite phone rang. Marcus glanced at the display, Layla, private secure line. He answered, smiling instinctively, warmth slipping into his voice. Hey, Princess, did you make it to London yet? A choked sob cut through the signal. Dad, just one word, and his whole body went still. What happened? Her voice trembled, barely coherent. I was humiliated. On our plane, the captain, he tore up my ticket. He said I didn't belong there. Silence. The hum of the jet vanished. Even the ticking stopped. Marcus set his cup down with calm precision, not a sound, not a tremor. His eyes darkened from warm brown to cold steel. Sometimes, you don't need to raise your voice to show power. You just need to be silent, and the world around you freezes. He inhaled slowly, his voice low, steady, almost a whisper. You're on flight 209 right. Yes, sit tight. Don't say another word. He pressed the intercom. Jason, change course immediately. Patch me through to Central Command. I need a live link to Flight 209. His pilot, Jason Cole, turned slightly. Yes, sir. He didn't ask why. No one ever did when Marcus Thompson gave an order. At Arius Air's Operations Center, a red alert flashed across the console. Incoming executive override, Gulfstream G700, Marcus Thompson. The technician scrambled. One of them muttered under his breath, God, he's calling straight into the flight system. Inside the Airbus A380 cockpit, Captain Richard Hale was checking their route when a red light blinked on his panel. First Officer Ethan Brooks frowned. Executive line, Marcus Thompson, CEO. Hale froze. His mouth went dry. That's impossible. Ethan gave a small shrug. Apparently not. Hale swallowed hard and pressed the comm switch. The voice that filled the cockpit was deep, calm and cold as stone. Captain Hale. Just 2 words yet. The cockpit suddenly felt smaller. Marcus didn't need to introduce himself. No one else spoke like that. Mr. Thompson. Hale stammered. It seems there's been a small misunderstanding about one of the passing. Marcus cut him off. His tone controlled, terrifyingly measured. You have 2 minutes to step into the cabin and explain why you tore up my daughter's ticket. No one spoke. Ethan turned away. pretending to check the radar, anything to hide the look on his face. Hale stared at the clock, the second hand gliding. Merciless. 2 minutes. In first class, the intercom clicked on. A man's voice came through, not the crew's. "Captain Hale, you have 2 minutes to step into the cabin and explain why you tore up my daughter's ticket." The air seemed to explode in silence. Passengers looked at one another, startled. Some recognized the name Marcus Thompson. Others didn't, but everyone understood whoever was speaking wasn't an ordinary passenger. Layla lifted her head. She knew that voice instantly, her father's calm, commanding, as steady as her heartbeat. Dad never needs to shout. He only has to speak once and the world listens. She didn't smile, didn't cry, just sat still, her eyes distant, unflinching. In the cockpit, Hale sat frozen. Ethan spoke quietly. "You should go, sir." Hale opened his mouth, but no words came. Finally, he rose, each step heavier than the last. When he opened the cabin door, light from the aisle hit his face, every wrinkle, every tremor in his hand visible. All eyes turned toward him, the man who had just realized the girl he'd humiliated was the daughter of the man who owned the plane. In an instant, the entire balance of power shifted. No one spoke it aloud, but everyone felt it. Hale walked slowly toward the end of the cabin, where Clara stood beside Layla. His voice rasped, trying to sound professional. "I need to speak with the passenger." Clara stepped aside quietly. Her eyes followed him not with anger, but with the cool gaze of someone watching the fall of a small empire called ego. Layla looked up. Her expression was calm, almost detached, the kind of calm that frightened more than fury ever could. This was the moment a man believed he ruled the sky, but didn't realize he was already falling. Hale lowered his head, voice shaking. Miss Thompson." I didn't know," Layla replied softly, evenly. "You don't need to know who I am to treat me with respect. You just need to know I'm human." The cabin held its breath. Hale stood there a moment longer, then turned away slowly, his shadow stretching long across the crimson carpet of first class. Clara leaned down to whisper, "Sweetheart, your father's calling again." Layla nodded, slipping on the headset. Her father's voice came through warm again now. The steel softened Layla. "I'm here. You don't need to say anything. Just remember, you did nothing wrong. I'll take care of the rest." In that moment, I thought, I finally understood justice doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from those who choose how to use their power. And far above the Atlantic night, 2 aircraft flew in parallel, a Gulfstream G700 and an Airbus A380, connected by an invisible signal, a father's voice, and the silent awakening of justice. The cockpit of Flight 209 was tight, glowing with the soft light of the control panels. The air inside felt thick, so heavy you could almost hear every breath. Captain Richard Hale sat back in his seat, headset still on, one hand resting on his knee. He was trying to steady himself, but his palms were drenched in sweat. A soft click echoed through the headset. Then came that voice, low, measured, carrying the weight of the entire sky. "Marcus Thompson. Captain Hale." The voice came through the satellite line, steady and distinct. "Can you hear me?" Hale swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, I can hear you. You know who I am." Marcus said, "No need for confirmation, and I believe you know why I'm calling." Silence. Ethan Brooks, the first officer, kept his gaze fixed straight ahead. He didn't dare speak. Marcus continued his tone even, not loud, but with the clarity of a verdict being read aloud. "What gave you the right to humiliate my daughter?" Hale inhaled slowly, trying to compose words. "Sir, I'm truly sorry. It was a misunderstanding. I just thought a misunderstanding." Marcus's voice cut through like a blade. It wasn't raised. It wasn't angry. It was cold enough to freeze air. "You expect me to believe that?" Captain Hale said nothing. He stared at the control panel numbers blinking in rhythm like he was trying to find shelter from an invisible storm. Marcus spoke again, slower now, pressing each word with deliberate weight. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Captain Hale. It was prejudice. Prejudice dressed in uniform, protected by years of routine, and disguised as discipline. But in truth, it's arrogance." Ethan glanced over in 10 years flying under Hale. He had never heard anyone speak to the man this way. Hale clenched his hands, voice trembling but trying to remain steady. "Sir, I've served for 35 years without a single complaint. I only acted under safety protocol." Marcus interrupted again, his voice lower now, but harder than steel. "Safety doesn't include tearing up a child's ticket because you thought she didn't belong there. You weren't protecting the flight, Captain. You were protecting your own bias." There was a long pause. Only the dull thrum of the engines filled the silence, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Ethan looked toward Hale. The proud captain, once unshakable, now sat slumped, his hands trembling, trying to keep his spine straight. "I used to think I knew what power was, that giving orders meant control. But hearing his voice now, I realized real power never needs to shout." Marcus's tone softened, but only slightly, the calm of a man who knew exactly where every word landed. "Tell me, Captain, in those 35 years, how many times have you looked at a black passenger and assumed they were in the wrong seat? How many times did your eyes say they didn't deserve to be there, even when their ticket said they did? And how many times did you call it a misunderstanding?" Hale didn't answer. He sank into the seat for the first time in his life, feeling small inside the cockpit he once called his throne. Maybe the most terrifying part of this job isn't losing it, but being forced to face yourself up here, above the clouds, with no one left to blame. Marcus exhaled slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, no longer anger, but judgment. "I believe in discipline, Captain, but I believe more in dignity. An airline can survive broken machinery, but it will collapse the moment its people lose their humanity." Hale blinked, his voice cracked, barely audible. "I'm sorry." Marcus didn't answer right away. The silence stretched sharp and heavy before he finally spoke. "Apologies don't erase actions, but they can begin change." Another pause. Then came his final words, clear, deliberate, effective immediately. "You are relieved of command. First Officer Ethan Brooks will assume control of Flight 209 until landing. Afterward, you'll meet with the Safety and Ethics Board. This isn't revenge. Captain, it's consequence." Hale looked up, eyes dim. Ethan met his gaze conflicted, but resolute, and gave a single respectful nod. Not for the man, but for the justice being carried out. Hale removed his headset. His hands trembled as he placed it gently on the console, almost afraid to break it. Then he stood. The captain's seat, the place he'd ruled for over 3 decades, sat empty behind him. Ethan slid into the chair, eyes scanning the instruments. His voice was calm but firm. "Flight 209 maintaining altitude, 36,000 feet. All systems stable. Marcus's voice came through the comms one last time. Thank you. First Officer Brooks, proceed with the flight. Hale stood frozen. He didn't move right away. The glow of the monitors painted his face once confident, now stripped bare. I used to think justice was something others handed down to you. But now I know justice is just a mirror. It doesn't strike you. It shows you what you've become. Ethan opened the cockpit door. Hale stepped out slowly, shoulders heavy, head bowed. As the door closed behind him, the air in first class changed quieter, but lighter somehow. Layla sat in her auxiliary seat, headset still on. She had heard the entire exchange. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a deep, silent calm. Dad didn't strike back. He just let truth do the talking. Clara Nyan approached gently. Everything's all right now. Layla, she said softly, the first officer's in command. The captain has stepped down. Layla nodded, a small, peaceful smile touching her lips. Thank you, Clara. She turned back to the window, the sky outside washed in violet twilight. The plane glided on, smooth and steady as if no storm had ever touched it. But everyone on board knew the truth. A different kind of justice had just taken place, not through shouting, not through power, but through silence that spoke louder than any noise. In the cockpit of Flight 209, the glow from the control panel cast pale light across Ethan Brooks' face, now the man in the captain's seat. All readings were steady. The sky outside lay smooth and still, like a sheet of glass. Behind him stood Richard Hale, no headset, no voice in his ear to shield him from the silence between them. Only the rhythmic hum of the engines, the steel heartbeats of a creature carrying hundreds of lives across the night. In Ethan's headset, Marcus Thompson's voice lingered low, deliberate, calm in a way that demanded obedience. First Officer Brooks, you are now in command of Flight 209. Maintain protocol, keep everyone safe, and don't worry, I'm here. Yes, sir, Ethan replied, voice steady but laced with something between awe and disbelief. Marcus paused, then switched channels. When his voice returned, it was different, stripped of its corporate composure. Now, the tone of a man speaking to another who had just lost the soul of his profession. Captain Hale. Hale lifted his head, throat dry. Sir. Marcus's tone carried no anger, no theatrics. Just wait. You've flown for my company for over 30 years. So you already know I didn't call to hear an apology. Hale's eyes dropped to the metal floor beneath his boots. Do you realize, Marcus continued quietly, on every flight, you don't just carry passengers, you carry the dignity of our name, and today, you let it fall. The line went still. Even the hum of the cabin seemed to pause, as if the air itself understood it was listening to judgment. Then came the sentence, calm, measured, and irreversible. I am relieving you of command, effective immediately, no shouting, no anger, just a verdict clean, final, as cold as a cockpit door sealing shut. From the reflection in the upper panel, Ethan caught sight of Hale, the veteran captain who'd once stared down storms and engine failures without flinching now looked unsteady, trembling under a voice spoken miles away. It's strange. I once believed that the higher you fly, the safer you are from consequence. But now I see justice doesn't need altitude. It only needs to find the right person to land on. Marcus's tone remained calm but unyielding, effective immediately. First Officer Brooks will command this flight. Upon landing, Airline security will meet you on the tarmac. You will surrender your pilot badge, your ID, and your flight license. The process will be handled by protocol, no exceptions. The cockpit felt heavier, the light dimmer, as if the instruments themselves recoiled. Hale nodded slowly, voice barely a whisper. "Understood, sir." Marcus's voice softened, almost human again. "I respected you once, Captain, and I want to believe you can still learn something from this that authority never grants you the right to look down on anyone." A soft click, the line went dead. Hale didn't move. Sweat beaded down his temple, catching the cockpit light, making him look like a statue melting from within. Ethan said nothing. He knew there were some moments too heavy to witness. Hale reached up and unclipped his nameplate, R. Hale. Captain. The metal felt colder than he remembered. He placed it gently on the control panel beside the throttle where his pride used to live. 35 years, 11,000 flight hours, all ending in 2 minutes. And maybe that's fair, because somewhere along the way, I forgot I wasn't flying above people. I was flying for them. His eyes lifted to the small embossed words above the window, "Aureus Air, the sky belongs to everyone." He had read that line 1,000 times before. Tonight, it read like a sentence. Hale turned, opened the door, and stepped out. Each step down the narrow aisle felt twice as heavy. The cockpit door closed softly behind him, separating him from the world he'd ruled for decades. In first class, no one spoke. They had all heard the CEO's voice moments earlier, calm but absolute, a command that needed no explanation. Some passengers bowed their heads, others pretended to sleep, ashamed of the laughter they'd shared earlier. Clara Nguyen stood near the cockpit door, watching Hale's shadow fade down the aisle. She didn't feel triumph, only the strange stillness that follows when truth cleans a space. She turned back to Layla. "It's over," Clara whispered. "The captain won't return." Layla nodded, quiet. She looked out the window, the sky vast, blue-black, indifferent to the small dramas beneath its wings. "I don't hate him. I think I pity him. Because some people spend their lives trying to fly high only to realize they never learned how to look down." Clara poured her a fresh glass of water, set it on the table. The two of them sat in silence, the distant hum of engines the only witness. Meanwhile, aboard the Gulfstream, 700 Marcus Thompson sat motionless, eyes fixed on the radar before him. 2 blips glowed on the screen, his private jet and Flight 209 flying side by side, bound for the Atlantic. His aide leaned in. "Sir, should I have the legal team prepare formal notice?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, let him face himself. I don't need to destroy him. He's already done that. Justice doesn't need fury. It only needs a mirror and the courage to look." He closed his eyes, letting the hum of the engines blend into the quiet. Outside, the moonlight stretched over the wings in a soft, silver sheen, as if the sky itself had accepted the verdict. When Hale returned to the passenger cabin, people averted their eyes. No words, no nods. He moved slowly down the aisle, fingertips brushing each seat back, each one a ghost of the authority he'd lost. As he passed Layla Thompson, she looked up, no smile, no scorn, just a calm gaze, clear, steady, and kind. Hale stopped. In her eyes, he didn't see hatred, only the stillness he'd once had and lost. He nodded a small, broken bow and walked on, settling into an empty seat at the back. Maybe this is the last lesson the sky had for me at 36,000 feet. Flight 209 continued toward London. No one said it aloud, but everyone on board knew they had just witnessed something rare, a man stripped of power, mid-air, by another who understood that true authority doesn't roar. It simply acts and lets the silence finish the sentence. The cabin of Flight 209 glowed under a wash of warm amber light. Outside, night had settled, the Atlantic stretched below like strands of silver thread woven through darkness. No one spoke, yet everyone could feel it. They had just witnessed something rare, true power being used to protect what's right. Layla Thompson sat quietly in seat 2A, still clutching the same crumpled tissue she'd held for hours. It was damp, wrinkled, and tired, yet she couldn't let it go. A few rows ahead, Clara and Guyon conferred with the cabin crew in hushed voices. No one needed to be told what to do, they simply understood. Soon, a small tray appeared apple juice, a slice of lemon cake, and a dish of chocolate mousse, her favorite. Not served with first-class formality, but with something softer kindness. Clara set it down gently and said, "You should eat something, sweetheart. It's been a long day." Layla nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Ms. Clara. I wasn't hungry, but I knew. Sometimes the people who didn't cause the pain are the ones who help the world apologize." Meanwhile, aboard the Gulfstream G700, Marcus Thompson still sat in the command lounge. The soft blue glow of the flight instruments traced across his face, weary, but calm. The satellite phone chimed again. This time, there were no sobs on the other end. Layla's voice trembled slightly, but it was clear. "Dad." Marcus smiled faintly. "I'm here, sweetheart." No corporate tone, no steel in his words now, just a father's voice. "I know what happened wasn't easy, but you handled yourself better than most adults could." Layla let out a shaky laugh. "I don't know whether to thank you or to cry." Marcus replied gently. "Both are allowed, but first, just keep flying. Stay calm. Eat your dessert. I'll take care of the rest." Layla chuckled softly, a real, small, pure laugh, as if the heaviness in the cabin was dissolving, one breath at a time. "My father always said justice isn't about punishing others. It's about helping yourself find peace again." The mood in first class had shifted. Those who had sneered earlier now avoided her gaze. A man in a gray suit whispered to his wife, "That girl's stronger than she looks." His wife murmured, "Not stronger, just right." The only sound left was the gentle clink of a spoon against glass, a quiet made not of fear, but of realization. From the cockpit, Ethan Brooks, now acting captain, came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Ethan Brooks speaking. We're cruising at 36,000 feet, en route to London. All systems are stable. Estimated arrival, early morning local time." His voice was calm, simple, yet everyone heard something different in it. The awareness of a man who had just become part of a story larger than himself. Clara returned to Layla's side, resting a hand on her shoulder. "She's proud of you, you know. The whole crew is." Layla met her eyes, those kind Vietnamese eyes glowing softly under the cabin light. "Thank you, but I don't want people to see me as special. I just want to be treated like everyone else." Clara smiled. "That's exactly what makes you special." Layla. Up front, Captain Richard Hale still sat in the jump seat, isolated, silent. The light caught every tired line on his face. No one spoke to him, but he could hear it in every whisper, every careful glance. I used to think silence was the power of command. Now I know silence can also be a sentence. He turned to the window. The moonlight skimmed across the wing so beautiful it almost hurt. Half of him wanted to stand and explain, to defend himself. The other half knew no defense would matter now. Somewhere in that same cabin, the young black girl he'd humiliated sat quietly, eating her dessert, and he, a man who once thought he commanded the skies, was now just another passenger on someone else's plane. Layla finished her meal, set her spoon down, and gazed out the window. The clouds below looked like a field of white flowers, silent, unbroken. A flight attendant approached with a blanket. "Miss Thompson, Mr. Thompson wanted you to know he's still tracking the flight. He said he'll stay airborne until we land safely." Layla smiled softly. "My dad's funny. He never leaves halfway through anything." She pulled the blanket close, leaned back, and closed her eyes. "I didn't need him to stay, but I understood that's how he loves me. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet presence, the same way he faces the world." The plane glided on through a sea of stars. Inside, no one spoke of race or power or pride anymore. Everything seemed to be healing not with speeches, but with silence, because above the clouds, where the air thins and the noise fades, every ego, every prejudice becomes small against the truth that every human life holds equal worth. In the cockpit of the Gulfstream G700, Marcus leaned back, eyes fixed on the radar screen. Two glowing dots, his jet in flight 209, moved side by side across the map. The distance between them. "Almost nothing," his aide asked softly. "Sir, aren't you going to rest for a bit?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I'll stay up a little longer, until she's asleep. When a person learns to respond not with anger, but with love and reason, they don't just heal others, they save themselves." By dawn, as the first rays of light broke through the clouds, Flight 209 flew steady and quiet, as if the night before had never happened. But for those who were there, especially the young girl in seat 2A, they knew something had changed forever. The world itself had shifted, just a little closer toward grace. Aureus Air Headquarters, Dallas, Texas, 03:45 a.m. local time. The 70-story glass tower still burned bright against the night. On the 52nd floor, in the emergency operations room, 3 massive screens glowed a constellation of moving flight paths across the world. Among the steady green dots, one red light blinked Flight 209. The news had traveled faster than any satellite signal. A captain fired mid-air during active flight by the CEO himself. Marcus Thompson. No one had ever seen anything like it in the history of American commercial aviation. Inside the boardroom, the air felt heavy, thick with caffeine and disbelief. Janet Ruiz, head of communications, set her half-empty coffee on the table. Her voice was hoarse. "If this leaks by morning, we're not facing turbulence, we're facing a media hurricane." Gregory Lang, chief legal officer, leaned back, fingers locked under his chin. "It's already out," he said flatly. A crew member texted a relative. "It's on a pilot form time-stamped 3:10 a.m. Silence. Only the hum of air conditioning and the nervous clicks of a keyboard filled the space. Evelyn Ward, EVP of Flight Operations, exhaled, her tone sharp but measured. "The issue isn't the leak. The issue is how we're going to face it. The door opened. Marcus Thompson stepped in. No entourage, no tie, shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked like a man who hadn't slept but whose resolve had sharpened instead of faded. Everyone stood. He raised a hand. Sit. Marcus scanned the room, calm, deliberate. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of still thunder. "I know what you're discussing," he said. "Yes, I relieved Captain Hale of duty mid-air, and no, I don't regret it. No one dared interrupt." He went on, voice even but absolute. "This wasn't just a policy violation. It was a crack in our culture, and if we don't fix it now, that crack will collapse the foundation of this company." Gregory, ever the lawyer, spoke carefully. "Sir, the pilots' union might claim procedural breach. Dismissing a captain mid-flight could be construed as." Marcus looked up, eyes steady as glass. "You call protecting human dignity a breach of procedure." The question landed like a hammer. No one answered. I sat near the end of the table. Lucas Meyer, internal PR specialist. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a crisis meeting. It was a mirror, a company staring at its own reflection. Marcus began pacing slowly around the table, his tone low but cutting clean through the silence. "In the next 24 hours, 3 things will happen." He raised 3 fingers. "First, transparency. We'll disclose the entire sequence internally. No spin, no cover-up. I don't want our employees learning about this from Twitter. Second, accountability. We'll release a public statement. We'll say Captain Richard Hale acted in a way that contradicts our values. We won't label him a racist, but we will say his behavior violated the aureus air principle of human respect. Third, reform. By morning, HR and legal will draft a mandatory bias awareness program for every leadership role, not just pilots, but recruiters, supervisors, PR, all of them." Janet looked up from her notes. Voice, "Careful, Mr. Thompson." That could be read as admitting systemic fault. "Are you sure you want to go public like that?" Marcus met her eyes. "I'm not afraid of admitting mistakes. I'm afraid of not learning from them." The energy in the room shifted. The tension didn't vanish, it transformed into respect. In the corner, the flight tracker updated Flight 209 stable altitude, ETA London 0725 AM. Beneath it, the automatic note read, "Captain Hale relieved from duty." Gregory exhaled. "Sir," he murmured, "you just set a precedent for the entire aviation industry." Marcus smiled faintly, not triumphantly, but knowingly. "Precedent isn't something to fear," he said quietly. "It's something you leave behind so others don't have to stay silent." The meeting ended around 4:20. Marcus walked out into the corridor, the city lights below reflecting off the glass walls, merging his shadow with the skyline. I followed, notebook in hand, but before I could speak, he turned to me. "Lucas," he asked, "what do you think they'll say about me in the morning?" I hesitated, then told the truth. "Some will call you a hero. Some will say you lost control." Marcus gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe both are right. But if no one ever loses control for the sake of what's right, then maybe we've already forgotten what right means." He walked on, disappearing into the elevator. As the doors closed, his reflection lingered, not just that of a CEO, but of a father, and of a man who refused to let silence mean acceptance. Outside, dawn began to break over Dallas. A janitor crossing the lobby heard the news bulletin crackling from a small radio. Breaking news: a veteran airline captain has been dismissed mid-flight by his CEO, an unprecedented move shaking the U.S. aviation industry. The janitor paused, glanced at the gleaming steel logo on the wall, Aureus Air. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Guess justice really can fly." At 36,000 feet above the Atlantic, First Officer Ethan Brooks checked the flight instruments again. 2 more hours to London. Behind him, the passengers slept soundly, among them Layla Thompson, the girl whose quiet dignity had changed an entire corporation. Ethan looked through the cockpit glass into the deep blue ahead. "I'm not sure I understand everything that just happened," he thought. "But I know this from now on. We'll fly differently." The sky over London was blanketed in fog, thick, ghostly, and pale. The Airbus A380 Flight 209 descended slowly, slicing through clouds that looked like ivory smoke before the runway of Heathrow Airport emerged beneath them. The wheels touched down with a crisp, final thud, a sound that felt like the closing of a long, hard chapter. Inside the cabin, seatbelts clicked open in rapid succession. Passengers stirred, murmuring softly. No one mentioned the night before, but everyone knew they had been witnesses to something far greater than a flight. Layla Thompson stayed seated. She gazed out the window as the London mist drifted past like breath on glass. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar the way people expect. It arrives quietly, gently steady enough for you to hear your own heartbeat. Clara Nguyen walked over, resting a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Welcome to London, Miss Layla," she said, her voice warm, carrying a kind of blessing. It wasn't just a greeting to a city, it was a welcome into a new chapter of courage. Layla smiled softly. "Thank you, Clara, for everything," Clara answered with her eyes, no words needed. When the cabin door opened, a rush of cold, misty air swept in. Ground staff stood waiting not only to assist passengers, but under special instruction from Aureus Air's London division, and among them, standing slightly apart, was Marcus Thompson. No press, no cameras, no entourage. Just a father, standing in the gray light, waiting for his daughter. When Layla appeared at the top of the ramp, he stepped forward. Neither of them spoke. He simply opened his arms. She walked into them as if this embrace had been waiting since the first moment the sky went dark. Marcus held her tight. The hug was long, unhurried, free of dramatics. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady, carrying the timbre of London's cold wind. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." You stood tall. Layla smiled through a small tremor. "I just did what you always told me: never let anyone steal your calm." He nodded. "And you did better than I ever could." At the back of the aircraft, Richard Hale remained in his seat long after everyone had gone. No one had told him to stay, but he knew this was his last duty as a pilot. When he finally rose, 2 Aureus Air security officers stood waiting at the door. No cuffs, no confrontation, just professionalism and silence. One stepped forward. "Captain Hale, you're requested in reception room 3 to complete your handover." Hale nodded, voice dry but controlled. "I understand." He held his captain's hat in his hand, once a symbol of 35 proud years. Now it felt heavy, like a verdict. As he stepped into the open air, he saw Marcus and Layla a short distance away. The ground crew paused, instinctively quiet. The wind hummed faintly against the aircraft's hull. Marcus turned. Captain Hale. The tone wasn't cold, it wasn't angry, it was simply calm, and somehow that calm carried more weight than rage ever could. Hale straightened his back. "Yes, sir." Marcus glanced toward his daughter. "This young lady is the one you wronged. I believe you have something to say to her." Hale swallowed hard. He turned to Layla. She didn't flinch or look away. Her eyes dark, steady, weighted, patient and unshaken. Hale began, voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson. I let prejudice blind my judgment. I forgot that up here in the sky. Every passenger is equal. You didn't deserve what I did." Layla looked at him for a long time. No tears, no trembling, just a slow, quiet nod. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice almost carried away by the wind. There was no "I forgive you," but there was no hatred, either. "I don't need you to bow. I just need you to remember from today on, other black girls won't have to feel what I felt." Marcus's eyes softened. He said quietly, "Justice isn't revenge. It's a reminder that dignity never has a price tag." Hale lowered his head, then, with trembling hands, he removed his pilot's badge and handed it to the company representative. His fingers shook, but he didn't look away. He turned and walked toward the terminal between the two officers. No one stopped him. No one spoke. And though some eyes watched with judgment, others held something closer to sorrow for a man who had lost everything to the weight of his own blind belief. Layla squeezed her father's hand. "Let's go home." "Dad?" Marcus nodded. They crossed the tarmac together, the London air damp and gray around them. Behind them, the massive Airbus A380 loomed silent now, like a witness that had fulfilled its duty. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to be seen and remembered. Inside the VIP lounge, as quiet returned, Marcus called Dallas HQ. His message was brief. "Let the media say what they want. We don't need to prove we were right. We just need to live that way." He hung up and turned to Layla. "You ready for the competition?" he asked with a small grin. She laughed the light, easy kind of laugh that felt like dawn. "I've been ready for a while." "Dad?" Marcus smiled back. "Good. Then go show them what you've learned, that words don't have to be loud to change the world." Outside, the morning sun began to break through the London fog. For most people, it was just another day. But for those who had come off that flight, nothing was the same anymore. No more seats that belonged to someone. No more glances that questioned worth. Only one truth remained, that human dignity, when held steady in silence, is the loudest voice we'll ever have. 3 weeks after the Flight 209 incident, the name Richard Hale no longer appeared on Arrayas Air's pilot roster, nor on the roster of any commercial airline in the United States. A brief industry bulletin made it official: Captain Richard Hale. Age 60, has had his commercial pilot license revoked, his wings and credentials permanently withdrawn, due to severe violation of professional ethical conduct. No press conference, no legal defense, just silence. His suburban home in Charlotte, North Carolina, looked unchanged from the outside: neat lawn, white porch, stillness, but inside, the small, familiar sounds of morning had stopped. The coffee machine that once hissed to life at dawn was quiet. The garage door stayed shut, the car beneath it coated in a thin film of dust. Hale now lived alone. His wife, Margaret, had moved to Seattle to live with their son. There had been no shouting, no fight, only the quiet kind of ending between two people who once loved each other deeply. but no longer had a place to rest their trust. One night, Hale opened the closet. His pilot uniform hung there, crisp white shirt, black tie, 3 striped epaulets. He couldn't bring himself to wear it again. He couldn't throw it away, either. They say losing your honor is like losing your wings, he thought. I never believed it until the day I could no longer touch the sky. For a few days, the media circled his name. Then they moved on. Headlines faded, replaced by newer scandals, fresher outrage. Only a few aviation forums mentioned him, now short, cutting posts from people who once knew his name. Hale's out, deserved, 35 years, gone. Just another file number now. Then, one morning, an email arrived from a small flight training company in Tennessee. We are seeking a simulator instructor for trainee pilots. Commercial license not required, experience preferred. He read it 3 times, then nodded quietly to himself. It would be his first job since falling from the sky. The simulator facility sat in an old warehouse, low ceiling. Smell of machine oil and melted plastic. No glossy glass cockpit. No high-tech screens. Just a battered simulator shell, flickering lights, a speaker crackling with artificial engine noise. Hale stepped inside and laid his hand on the control panel. 35 years of muscle memory flooded back the smooth steel, the rhythm of switches, the hum of altitude and trust. Except now, the sky was made of pixels. He began teaching young trainees how to take off in crosswinds, how to land in low visibility, how to stay calm when alarms screamed. They took notes diligently. Few of them knew that the quiet man with silver hair had once been among the most respected captains in the nation. During one session, a student asked, "Sir, do you ever miss flying for real?" Hale paused. He didn't look up, just answered softly, "Every day, but it's not the sky I miss. It's the feeling that I still deserve to be up there." After class, he often stayed behind alone, lights off, the simulator glowing faint blue across his face. He would close his eyes, imagining the engines, the climb, the air pressing against the fuselage, the pulse of a life that once carried him. "I used to think people only fall when the plane goes down," he reflected. "Turns out, some crashes make no sound at all." One late April afternoon, an envelope arrived from Aureus Air. Not a lawsuit, not a reprimand, just a small card embossed with the company's silver logo. Inside, a short handwritten note signed, Marcus Thompson. "I'm not writing to reopen the past. I just want to say this: if you ever decide to teach again, teach them about respect, because that's a lesson you now understand best." Hale read it over and over. He didn't cry, but his eyes lingered on the final line for a long time. Then he turned the card over and wrote, in a shaky but firm hand, "Thank you. I'm learning again, one day at a time." By May, Tennessee slipped into its rainy season. The sky stayed gray most afternoons, but Hale showed up to the training center every day. On time. He spoke less now, but the trainees had grown to like him not for his precision, but for his quiet decency. Andre, a young black trainee, told his friend Captain Hale's not like the others. He never says we gotta prove we belong here. He just says, "Flying is flying. Everyone has their own sky." That evening, Hale left the hangar as the rain poured down. He stopped by the glass door, watching his reflection shimmer in the water, older, lined, but calm. He looked up into the clouded sky. No stars. Still, he knew they were there. Maybe justice isn't about getting back what you lost, he thought. Maybe it's about learning to live with the part of you that's still left. He smiled a faint, fragile smile, the first since that flight. Then he pulled his old cap low and stepped into the rain. Slow but steady, grounded yet lighter than he had been in years. Across the country, in Marcus Thompson's office, a framed photo sat on the shelf, Layla, standing on stage in London, holding a gold trophy from the International Debate Championship. Below it lay the same card Hale had returned, the one with the uneven handwriting I'm learning again one day at a time. Marcus looked at it quietly. No bitterness, no triumph. Just the stillness of a man who believed that when justice is planted the right way, it always knows how to find its way back to the human heart. 3 months after the Flight 209 incident, the name Air was still echoing across media outlets, but this time, not in scandal, in reform. In the world of aviation, a world built on discipline and silence, few CEOs had ever stepped into the storm and said, "We were wrong, and we will make it right." But Marcus Thompson had done exactly that. In his own way, calm, slow, utterly transparent. Air Headquarters, Dallas, Texas, Monday morning. The press room was packed shoulder to shoulder. Camera lights washed over Marcus's face as he took the stage. No teleprompter, no stack of notes, just him. "I'm not here to read a speech," he began, voice steady and unhurried. "Because speeches are easy to forget. I want to say something real. Every lens, every mic turned toward him. I'm Marcus Thompson, founder of this company. I built Air from a dream to create flights that are safe, humane, and fair. But I've realized something between dreams and reality. There's a gap, and that gap is human bias." He paused, eyes scanning the room of reporters. "I'm not here to blame one man. I'm not here to cover up what was wrong. I'm here so people can see justice isn't firing a person. It's changing a culture." I was there that morning, a freelance journalist, notebook in hand. I had covered dozens of corporate scandals before, but never had I seen a CEO stand on stage, owning his company's flaws without trembling, without spinning, without acting. Marcus continued, his voice calm but carrying today. Air announces a full-scale reform plan so that what happened on Flight 209 will never happen again. Behind him, the screen lit up with the words, "The Arias Reformation Initiative, beginning a culture of fairness." He spoke through each point, slowly, no flourish, no drama, just conviction. 1. We're establishing the role of Chief of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion DEI. 2. Every employee, including myself, will complete mandatory unconscious bias training annually. 3. Executive bonuses will now be tied directly to diversity and equity metrics. 4. We're launching an anonymous reporting line so anyone can speak up against discrimination, without fear. And finally, Marcus Thompson, take full responsibility. He let that sentence hang, then added, softer. Not because I want to be called brave, but because I'm the only one who doesn't get to say, "I didn't know." The room fell silent, not the silence of shock, but of respect. Then came the clicks of cameras. A reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Thompson, critics say your actions are just a PR move to repair the company's image, not to deliver justice." "What do you say to that?" Marcus looked directly at her. "If this were about image," he said, "I would have stayed quiet. Silence is safer than honesty." But I chose honesty because I want my daughter to grow up in a world where people can make mistakes and still be allowed to make them right. That night, the NBC Evening News opened with the line, "An American CEO has done what few ever dare, turning crisis into rebirth." The following morning, The Atlantic ran a feature titled Marcus Thompson, "When Justice Doesn't Need a Microphone, Only Action." Back in Dallas, the reforms were more than headlines, they were visible. Anti-bias sessions weren't just slide decks anymore, they became conversations. Clara Nguyen was promoted to Deputy DEI Director, the first Asian American woman to hold an executive role at Arias Air. In the main lobby, a new photograph was mounted, not of Marcus, not of a plane, but of a young girl by a cabin window, sunlight soft on her calm face. The caption read, "Every passenger deserves dignity." Everyone knew who the girl was. Layla Thompson. One late afternoon, Marcus sat in his 52nd floor office, watching the Dallas skyline turn bronze under the setting sun. On his desk lay the first DEI quarterly report. Minority representation in leadership plunged 28% after 3 months. 82% of staff now describe Arias as a fairer workplace. 67% say their voices are finally being heard. Marcus closed the report, smiling faintly, not at the numbers but at the realization that, for the first time in years, the company he built was flying true. I met him again 2 months later at an aviation summit. I asked, "Mr. Thompson, do you believe justice has been served?" He paused, thoughtful, eyes calm as ever. "Justice," he said, "is never finished. It's like a long-haul flight. Every time you think you've landed, the weather changes." That night, at home, Marcus rewatched the press conference video. There was a moment where he glanced down from the podium to the first row. Layla sat there, smiling softly, not with pride, but with belief. He closed the laptop, turned toward the window. The Dallas night spread wide deep, still, stormless. People ask me what justice means, Marcus thought. I tell them this: it's when a 16-year-old girl teaches the world how to treat each other again. 3 months after the historic press conference, the name Marcus Thompson was no longer just tied to an airline. It had begun to appear in business schools, in evening talk shows, and in the small cafe corners of Dallas, where people sipped coffee and spoke of leadership, fairness, and change. It all began with a single article. The author, Eleanor Wright, an independent journalist, the same woman who had been on board Flight 209 that night. The headline read, "Prejudice at 35,000 feet." It wasn't a long piece, nor a dramatic one, just sharp, honest observations, the cold glance of Captain Hale, the trembling hands of a black girl holding her ticket, and the profound silence of an entire first-class cabin as justice quietly returned in the steady voice of a father. I didn't see anger in her eyes, Eleanor wrote, only sadness and a question. Why? At 35,000 feet, that question echoed louder than any speech given on the ground. The article went viral within days. News anchors quoted it. Headlines followed the girl who made the aviation industry look in the mirror. When justice doesn't shout, it whispers. Then came Marcus Thompson, not as a CEO desperate to save his image, but as a man unafraid to face the truth. He appeared on CNN, across from Savannah Lee, the sharp-tongued anchor known for grilling the powerful. "Mr. Thompson," she began. Many say your reforms are just damage control and attempt to soothe public outrage. How do you respond to that? Marcus met her gaze calm, grounded. He spoke slowly. Clearly, we're not here to blame. We're here to learn and change. If one mistake can make the world better, I'll take responsibility for another one tomorrow. Savannah paused, then nodded. On live television, millions watched something rare, a powerful man choosing accountability over defense. From that day on, Aureus Air stopped being the airline of the rich white elite. It became a symbol of inclusion. New faces began to appear in the leadership roster: Clara Nguyen, now Deputy DEI Director, the first Vietnamese-American woman in Aureus executive ranks; Ethan Brooks, the first officer who had taken emergency command midair, now promoted to head of flight training; and most notably, Andre Hale, a young black trainee once taught by Richard Hale himself, was accepted into Aureus's new young pilots program. One morning, as Andre buttoned his crisp new uniform, he looked in the mirror and whispered, "Thank you, sir." Not in mockery, but in gratitude, because the lesson on prejudice had widened his sky. I still remember reading Prejudice at 35,000 feet on my phone one morning. I stopped at the last line. Justice doesn't need to soar higher than the clouds. It just needs to rise above prejudice. And I thought, for the first time, a story about a plane is making people look down at the ground and realize how small they've been. Across the country, universities began using Aureus Air as a case study. A Harvard professor told his students, "We often think justice is found in courtrooms. Sometimes it's in how a company handles its own mistakes." On social media, hundreds of employees from other industries began posting with the hashtag, "We learn to fly right." The movement spread to banks, tech firms, schools. They called it the Aureus effect, the transformation from crisis to reform, silence to awareness. In mid-June, Marcus was invited to speak at the Federal Aviation Academy's graduation ceremony. He stood before a sea of white uniforms and young faces and spoke just briefly. "You're about to enter the sky. But remember, don't just learn how to fly, learn how to look down to see the people beneath the clouds. They're not colors, they're lives." The hall fell into perfect stillness. Then, one by one, the graduates rose and applauded. Slow, steady, real. At home, Layla watched the clip on TV beside her mother, a cup of tea in hand, eyes glinting softly. "Dad doesn't need to speak loudly," she murmured. "He just has to speak like himself, and people listen." Olivia smiled, resting a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Sometimes justice isn't passed down," she said. "It's learned from those brave enough to stand still." Meanwhile, in Tennessee, inside a flight simulator classroom, Richard Hale stood before his students. He wrote one word on the board in white chalk: bias, then turned to them and asked, "Who here thinks they don't have bias?" No one raised a hand. He nodded and smiled faintly. "Good," he said, "because recognizing it is the first step to flying higher." That evening, Eleanor Wright appeared on a talk show. The host asked, "What do you think made your article resonate with so many people?" Eleanor smiled thoughtfully. "Maybe because it wasn't about a black girl or an airline," she said. "It was about all of us, the times we judged someone simply because we thought we knew better." The studio went silent. Then she added, "And luckily, the world still has people calm enough to remind us otherwise." A year after Flight 209, Aureus Air was honored by the Global Ethics Forum as a pioneer in cultural reform and fairness. Marcus didn't attend. He sent a short message that appeared on the screen instead. We're not being honored because we're perfect. We're being recognized because we dared to begin. And I, the one who had followed this story from the start, realized something strange. No one remembered the torn ticket anymore. They remembered the feeling the moment a young girl stayed calm in the face of humiliation, and somehow made the entire world reconsider how we treat one another. On a crisp October morning at Los Angeles International Airport, a young black woman in an Aureus pilot uniform stepped into the cockpit. Her nameplate read Layla Thompson, First Officer. She placed her hand on the throttle and smiled. Outside, the sky stretched open blue, deep, and just a little more fair. Dad was right, she thought. Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to fly in the right direction. A crisp autumn morning settled over New York's JFK Airport, carrying a strange calm. No rush of crowds, just the soft hum of rolling suitcases and the muffled announcements dissolving into air. Layla Thompson, now 17, stood among them taller, steadier. Her eyes no longer those of a girl once wounded, but of someone who had learned how to walk through pain and out the other side. Over her shoulder hung a sleek satchel stamped with the Aureus Air Scholars Program logo. After her victory at the International Debate Championship, she had been invited to join a new project, Ethics in Modern Aviation, sponsored, fittingly, by her father's company. This time, she was flying to Atlanta for a conference. The airline, Aureus Air, same wings of gold on a white field. But this sky this time felt truly equal. At the gate, the attendant scanned her ticket. On the screen flashed Priority Pass, L, Thompson, MT Prime, Heritage Code. Layla smiled faintly. A simple code, yet one that carried a quiet legacy of justice. The cabin door opened. Light glinted off the silver fuselage. From inside came the firm, even footsteps of the captain. A young man in uniform turned Captain Daniel Evans. Early 30s, tall, with warm brown skin and steady eyes. He smiled when he saw her. "Welcome aboard, Miss Thompson." Layla blinked, slightly surprised by the tone, calm, grounded, familiar. It was the voice of someone who had also once had to prove himself 10 times over, just to be seen as equal. Evans continued, still with that unforced respect. "It's truly an honor to have you on this flight. I've been hoping for this moment for a long time." Layla tilted her head, curious. "Why is that?" "Captain." He met her gaze, his smile touched with quiet gratitude. "Because it's thanks to you and your father that I have this chance today." The cabin seemed to still for a heartbeat. No need for explanation. They both understood. Layla's reply came with a small, knowing smile, not proud, not sentimental, just clear. "I never needed to be honored. I just wanted to see the world put the right people in the right seats." Evans stepped aside, gesturing for her to board first. She walked to seat 2A, the same seat. The leather was still soft, the windows still perfectly aligned with the light, but in the golden wash of morning, there was no echo of hurt anymore, only peace. On the tray table sat a glass of orange juice and a small envelope bearing the Aureus logo. She opened it. Inside was a single card for Layla Thompson. "The sky remembers you. Marcus Thompson." Layla smiled, folding it carefully. She didn't need to look up to know her father was watching from his Dallas office, not supervising, just witnessing. The circle had come full. The engines hummed. The plane rolled toward the runway. The cabin speakers clicked on, and Captain Evans' voice filled the air deep, steady, warm. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain, Daniel Evans. Welcome aboard Arrayas Air Flight 217 to Atlanta, a flight crewed by people who believe the sky belongs to everyone." Layla turned to the window, light spilling across the wing. A memory flickered, the tearing of a ticket, the sting of laughter behind her, tears that never quite fell. She exhaled softly. Justice doesn't turn back time, she thought. It just helps us stop being afraid to look back. At 35,000 feet, a flight attendant placed a small leather-bound notebook before her. The cover was embossed with the aureus wings. On the first page, in elegant print, Flight 209, the day we learned to fly right. Layla turned the page's short messages, handwritten notes of gratitude from staff, pilots, passengers. Thank you, Layla, for teaching us what no textbook ever could. I used to think fairness was abstract. Now I know it starts with how we see another person. She closed the notebook gently, slipped it into her bag. No tears, just the complete, gentle quiet that comes when justice has finally landed. I was there. To a passenger once seated in 2C. Back then, I'd smirked when the captain tore up a young black girl's ticket. Today, watching her sit by the window in peace, I understood some flights don't just take you somewhere, they take you back to yourself. As the plane touched down in Atlanta, the passengers clapped softly. Not for the landing, but for the sense that something, somehow, had healed. At the door, Captain Evans extended his hand. "I hope we'll see you on many more flights, Miss Thompson." Layla smiled, her voice light as air. "You will, because this sky finally knows how to welcome people." Outside, the sunlight struck the metal steps, scattering into golden streaks. Layla paused, glanced back at the aircraft, a place that had once held her humiliation, now transformed into proof of change. She stepped down, the warm air brushing her face. For a brief moment, she felt weightless, almost part of the wind. Dad always said justice doesn't need to shout, she thought. Now I understand sometimes. It just needs to keep living, beautifully. Sometimes, a small story in the sky reflects an entire world beneath it. Flight 209 of Arrayas Air was once just another international route until a single torn ticket forced an entire system of power to face itself. Now, long after the turbulence has passed, people no longer speak of the racist pilot who was fired. They speak of something deeper, a tragedy, and a rebirth. It began with humiliation. A 16-year-old black girl, Layla Thompson, simply wanted to fly to London to debate social justice. Before she could even take off, a grown man tore up her boarding pass and said, coldly, "People like you don't belong here." Just a moment, but enough to expose a truth. Society still tries to hide prejudice doesn't need a weapon. It only needs the wrong gaze. That girl didn't fight back with anger. She stood there shaking, silent but unbroken. And in that silence, the world began to change. Then came the response. From a private jet high above the Atlantic, her father, Marcus Thompson, CEO of Arrayas Air, heard his daughter's trembling voice over satellite radio. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he just asked, calm and clear enough to freeze a cockpit Captain Hale. You have 2 minutes to explain why you tore up my daughter's ticket. And in those 2 minutes, the arrogance of false authority collapsed. Justice didn't come from a courtroom, but from a father steady, rational, and utterly unwilling to let silence protect wrongdoing. Marcus didn't just discipline a man. He woke an entire system that had been sleeping under privilege. If the story had stopped there, it would have been nothing more than another scandal. But what followed made it history, the transformation. Marcus Thompson didn't run. He stood before the press, steady and sincere, and said, "We're not here to blame. We're here to learn and to change." From a personal tragedy, he built a cultural revolution inside his company. An airline once powered by hierarchy began to fly on conscience. A corporation that once hired only its own kind opened its doors to everyone. I remember reading Eleanor Wright's article, Prejudice at 35,000 feet. It didn't point fingers. It simply described the look in a girl's eyes, the way she swallowed her tears and stayed composed in a storm. And maybe because there was no shouting, the whole country finally heard. From humiliation to reckoning to rebirth, that was the arc of this story. An arc not unlike America's own. We stumble, we react, and, if we're lucky, we learn to rise this time, quietly, without violence. Today, Layla is grown, no longer the victim of a foolish act, but proof that dignity can make even a corporation change how it treats people. Marcus isn't celebrated as a hero, but respected as a man humble enough to correct himself. He once said, "Justice doesn't end when the guilty are punished. It begins when the rest of us start to reflect." And then there's Captain Hale, a man who once saw himself as the peak of discipline and experience, now standing in a flight simulator classroom, teaching young cadets about bias. No rank, no spotlight, only a man who learned that life's hardest lesson is the one about himself. Aureus Air is no longer just an airline. It's a symbol of how humans can fail and still learn to repair. New faces fill the conference rooms once reserved for old power women, immigrants, people of color, and on every flight, the company's motto has changed. No longer fly higher, now it reads fly right. I once overheard an old veteran in a Dallas cafe watching the evening news say, "You know, son, I used to fly planes for war. Now I see people flying them for justice. Guess the world's finally headed the right way." This story, which seems to be about an airline, is really an allegory for every organization, every person who has ever failed. No one is flawless. But there are two ways to face our mistakes. We can deny them, or we can turn them into lessons for the world. Marcus and Layla chose the second path, and that's why they won. If Flight 209 left anything behind for humanity, it wasn't a headline about a firing. It was a message: true power isn't in commanding others, it's in listening when you're wrong. And justice, as Marcus once said, isn't a fire meant to burn, but a light meant to guide. As the sky closes over the final flights of the day, the golden wings of Aureus Air glide quietly through the dusk. Somewhere, a young black woman sits in the cockpit, her hand resting on the throttle, her eyes fixed on the rising dawn. That day, they tore up your ticket, Marcus once told her. But now, you're flying with your own wings. The story of Layla and Marcus Thompson may have reached its end, but the lesson they left behind is still flying somewhere above the skies within each of us. Maybe you've seen injustice and didn't know what to do. Maybe you've stayed silent, thinking, "That's not my business." But sometimes it only takes one small act, one timely word, or simply staying calm instead of angry to change the world around you. The sky itself doesn't discriminate. It's people who draw the boundaries, and it's also people like Marcus, like Layla, who can break those boundaries through wisdom and compassion. If this story moved you, hit like so more people can see it. Share this video to spread the message of respect and fairness, and subscribe to join us as we continue telling true stories about humanity, dignity, and justice. Because sometimes what the world needs most isn't another hero, but someone brave enough to stand still and choose what's right.